1868, Italy, the choirboys who died singing the same note, the Caltanissetta mystery. The year was 1868. Inside the cathedral of Caltanissetta, the glow of candles flickered against marble walls, casting long, trembling shadows. The air smelled of incense and damp stone. That night, the townspeople gathered for mass, unaware they were about to witness a tragedy that would echo for generations. The choirboys, barely 12, some as young as 9, took their places. Their white robes swayed softly as they lifted their hymnals. A silence spread across the cathedral, heavy, expectant. Then, with the strike of the organ's first note, they began to sing. Their voices rose, pure and haunting, carrying across vaulted ceilings. The hymn was old, older than the town itself. The melody spoke of sorrow and salvation, of sin and forgiveness. But as the song neared its climax, something unnatural unfolded. One by one, the boys' voices faltered. Their faces turned pale. A strange cough rippled through the choir, faint at first, then louder, harsher. The organ drowned in chaos as children clutched their throats, gasping for air. Still, as if bound by fate, they sang one final note together. A single piercing sound that cut through the cathedral like a knife. And then, silence. Mothers rushed forward. Priests froze in horror. Candles flickered violently as the last echoes of that note lingered in the vast, sacred hall. When the smoke cleared and the voices stopped, the choirboys lay still, their hymnals fallen to the ground, pages fluttering like dying birds. No one could explain it. Dozens of boys dead, all at once, in the middle of a hymn. Their lips still parted in song, their eyes wide with terror. The priest's voice broke the silence. They died singing to God. But the whispers that followed suggested something far darker. That night, the town became a tomb. The bells tolled endlessly, their sorrowful chime rolling across narrow streets and into the countryside. Families wept behind shuttered windows. Children clung to their mothers, afraid to sleep. The questions spread like wildfire. Was it a plague? A curse? Poison in the air? Some claimed they saw black smoke rising from the organ pipes, as if the instrument itself breathed death. Others whispered that the bishop had been warned, told never to let the boys sing that hymn again. But why? And what secret did the hymn carry that was worth dying for? The mystery of that night would never leave Caltanissetta. The boys were buried together in a single grave, their coffins lined side by side, as the town mourned in silence. But silence did not bring peace. Instead, it bred suspicion. The families wanted answers. The priests wanted the tragedy forgotten. And beneath the stone floor of the cathedral, rumors began to crawl like shadows. Rumors of poison, betrayal, and a sacred song that carried a deadly curse. Even today, locals say that if you stand in the cathedral late at night, you can still hear the faint sound of children singing. Not a choir, not a hymn, just one long, unbroken note, drifting through the darkness. A reminder of the night when innocence died with a song. The morning after the tragedy, the cathedral stood frozen in time. Candles had melted into shapeless pools of wax. Hymnals lay scattered on the floor, their pages torn and stained with the smudge of ash and incense. But the most haunting detail was the silence. For centuries, the cathedral had been alive with sound. Bells at dawn, the organ's thunder at dusk, and the laughter of children rehearsing in the choir loft. Now all of it was gone. The bells did not ring. The organ keys remained untouched. Even the birds that usually nested in the eaves seemed to have vanished. The silence was not peaceful. It was suffocating. When the townspeople entered the cathedral that morning, they walked with hesitation, as if afraid the walls might whisper. Mothers clutched rosaries until their knuckles turned white. Old men crossed themselves at every shadow. No one spoke of faith. No one spoke of God. They only asked, what had taken our children? The bishop ordered the cathedral sealed for 3 days. The great wooden doors were bolted shut, and guards were placed outside. Officially, it was to preserve the sanctity of the investigation. Unofficially, it was because no priest dared step onto the altar. Still, rumors slipped through cracks like smoke. Some claimed the boys had been poisoned by incense imported from Palermo, its mixture tainted with arsenic. Others swore it was the organ pipes, corroded with lead and dripping unseen toxins into the air. And yet, the strangest whispers spoke of a hymn, one never meant to be sung in unison. The townspeople waited for answers, but none came. By the third day, grief had turned to rage. Mothers gathered in the square, their cries echoing against stone walls. They demanded the cathedral be reopened, demanded to see where their children had fallen. The bishop relented. When the doors creaked open, the people entered as though stepping into a grave. The choir loft was stained with footprints, small, overlapping, desperate. On the pews below, faint impressions remained where children had collapsed. And in the air, though no incense burned, there lingered the faintest trace of smoke. A father, trembling, knelt at the altar and pressed his ear to the stone floor. His voice shook when he whispered, "They're still singing." The silence of the cathedral became its most enduring ghost. Priests avoided late-night prayers, claiming they heard footsteps pacing the choir loft. Parishioners swore they felt a draft, as though invisible figures brushed past them in the pews. Some even left the church altogether, choosing to pray in their homes rather than under the cursed roof. Yet the bishop remained. He walked the nave at night, clutching a candle, his face pale and drawn. No one knew what he was searching for, or what he was hiding. And while the town waited for answers, the silence grew heavier. Because silence in Caltanissetta was never empty, carried weight, carried memory. It carried the unspoken truth that something unnatural had taken hold of the cathedral. And in that silence, a question echoed louder than bells ever could. Was this God's punishment, or man's sin? The town's grief soon turned into suspicion. By the end of the week, whispers spread faster than the tolling of bells. People spoke not of curses anymore, but of poison. The choir loft, once filled with the laughter of children, became the center of speculation. Mothers swore they smelled something strange in the air that night, a bitter, metallic odor that clung to the robes of the dead. Fathers who carried their sons home insisted their lips tasted of iron. And some said the smoke that rose from the organ pipes wasn't incense at all, but something darker. The bishop denied it. He claimed it was blasphemy to accuse the church of poisoning its own children. Yet he offered no other explanation. He refused to let anyone examine the organ pipes or test the incense. Every question was deflected with prayers. Every doubt was silenced with threats of excommunication. But silence only deepened suspicion. Late one night, two men crept into the cathedral. A blacksmith and a gravedigger. Both had buried too many children that week, and both were desperate for truth. They climbed the narrow staircase to the choir loft, their lantern flickering against the stone. What they found was unsettling. The organ pipes were coated with a thick residue, black and sticky. The smell was overwhelming, sharp, acrid, unnatural. The blacksmith gagged, covering his mouth with his sleeve. The gravedigger swore it was the same odor he had smelled on the dead boy's breath. But before they could take proof back to the townspeople, the bishop's guards caught them. Their lantern was smashed, their findings dismissed as drunken lies. By morning, both men had vanished from town. Still, the rumors would not die. They grew heavier with each retelling. Some said the incense had been mixed with arsenic by mistake. Others claimed the bishop himself ordered poison placed in the pipes, though no one could agree why. Theories became wilder. Was it to silence the hymn that should never have been sung? Or was it punishment for sins the townspeople did not yet understand? Each night, people swore they saw shadows moving in the choir loft, long after the cathedral doors were locked. Some said they heard coughing, faint but unmistakable, echoing in the rafters. The fear became unbearable. Parents refused to let their children anywhere near the cathedral. Choir practice was cancelled indefinitely. The once proud sound of young voices lifting toward heaven was gone, replaced by uneasy silence. Yet one truth lingered among the people of Caltanissetta. whispered only behind closed doors. The choirboys had not died naturally. They had been poisoned. Whether by accident or design, no one dared say aloud. But everyone knew this: someone had killed the children. And that someone was still among them. The Bishop of Caltanissetta was a man of presence. Tall, cloaked in black, his gold cross glinting like firelight when he entered a room. For years, he had been the town's spiritual anchor, a figure both feared and revered. But after the deaths of the choirboys, his sermons grew shorter, his eyes more sunken, and his hands, once steady, began to tremble. People noticed he rarely spoke of the tragedy. He never mentioned the boys by name. Instead, he told the congregation that suffering was a test of faith. His words rang hollow against the cold stone walls, and families left Mass feeling more betrayed than comforted. Still, the bishop carried a secret heavier than the cathedral doors. And soon that secret began to leak. The first clue appeared when an altar boy discovered something missing. A chalice. Not just any chalice, but the gilded cup used only during High Mass, the one said to have been gifted centuries earlier by a Spanish cardinal. It was gone, vanished without explanation. At first, whispers tied the theft to thieves in the night. But those who worked within the cathedral knew better. The chalice had not been stolen, it had been hidden. The altar boy, trembling with fear, confided to his mother that he had once seen the bishop clutching it in the sacristy, his lips moving in prayer, though no words came out. She told him never to repeat it. But children's words travel, and soon the whole town knew. Why would the bishop hide the chalice? Rumors multiplied like flies over a coffin. Some claimed the cup had been used the night of the tragedy, that the wine poured for the boys before they sang had been tainted. Others whispered that the chalice was cursed, carrying the same poison that had killed its drinkers centuries before. A darker story circulated still. It was said that the chalice bore an inscription, nearly invisible, etched along its rim. A warning in Latin: non canator in uno. Never sing in one voice. No one knew if it was true. No one could prove it. But the missing chalice became a symbol of guilt, of secrets locked away by the church. One night, a servant claimed she saw the bishop burying something in the cathedral garden. She swore he dug deep into the earth by candlelight, his shoulders shaking, his lips moving in frantic prayer. By the time she dared tell the story, the ground had been covered with new roses, their roots nourished by whatever lay beneath. Was it the chalice? Or something worse? The next morning, the bishop stood at the pulpit, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. But as he lifted his hands to bless the congregation, the people stared not at his cross, not at his robes, but at the faint black stains on his fingertips, like soot that could not be washed away. From that day forward, the bishop's gaze seemed haunted. He avoided the choir loft. He flinched at the tolling of bells. And when he walked the streets of Caltanissetta, mothers pulled their children close, as though his shadow alone carried sickness. The missing chalice was never found. But the fear it left behind was enough to poison the town more deeply than any smoke or incense ever could. Not far from the cathedral, on a hill overlooking the narrow streets of Caltanissetta, stood the orphanage. Its walls were tall, its windows barred, its iron gates always closed. The townspeople said it was a place of charity, but the children who lived there knew it as a place of silence. Many of the choirboys had come from this very building. They were the orphans, the forgotten, the ones no family ever claimed. The church had taken them in, fed them, clothed them, and in return, the boys gave their voices to God. Their hymns filled the cathedral, their innocence woven into every Massachusetts. But after that night, when their voices were silenced forever, the orphanage became more than a place of shadows. It became a place of fear. The halls were said to echo with footsteps long after the children were buried. Nuns reported waking to the sound of coughing, raspy and weak, drifting through the dormitories. Candles snuffed themselves out, leaving corners blacker than midnight. And more than once, a nun claimed to see small figures standing at the end of the corridor, pale and still, their mouths open as if mid-song. The children who remained grew restless. They whispered about their lost brothers, saying they returned at night to warn them. Some swore they heard faint singing in their dreams, always the same haunting note, the very sound that had killed their friends. One boy was so terrified he refused to sleep in the dormitory. He hid beneath the stairwell, clutching his blanket, whispering, "They don't want to be alone in the grave." Rumors soon tied the orphanage directly to the tragedy. Some said the boys had been made to drink from a chalice before they sang, a bitter-tasting wine the nuns had forced upon them. Others claimed a ledger existed, hidden in the orphanage offices, detailing shipments of strange powders and tonics sent from Palermo, items never meant for children. One maid, pale with fright, confided to her sister that she had once seen the bishop himself visiting the orphanage after midnight, speaking in hushed tones with the Mother Superior. Their conversation ended with locked doors and the sound of weeping. But when asked about it later, the maid denied everything. Her fear was greater than her grief. The orphanage became a place parents feared more than pitied. Townspeople began to whisper that the church used the children not for charity, but for something darker. The shadows that lingered in those halls felt less like memory and more like accusation. The surviving orphans carried the weight of silence. Every hymn they had sung now felt cursed. Every corridor carried the chill of absence. And though the building still stood, its reputation rotted. Families crossed the street to avoid walking near its gates. Windows remained shuttered. Doors stayed locked. At night, the orphanage was as silent as the cathedral, except, the townspeople said, for that single note that drifted through the halls. The note the children died singing. Caltanissetta did not heal. Weeks passed, then months, but the town remained bound to that night. The tragedy of the Choirboys became more than memory. It became a haunting. At first, it was only the cathedral. Parishioners swore they heard faint singing when the nave was empty. Priests claimed the organ sometimes played by itself, a low groan of pipes stirred by no hand. Some said the hymnals moved during the night, their pages opening to the same verse, as if the boys themselves were still rehearsing. But soon, the voices spread beyond the cathedral walls. On foggy nights, mothers said they heard children singing in the streets, their voices distant but unmistakable. Farmers working the fields at dusk reported the same. One long note, rising from nowhere, carried on the wind. The graveyard was worst of all. Those who visited the boys' communal grave swore they felt vibrations in the ground, like faint humming beneath the soil. One widow, visiting her husband's grave nearby, claimed she heard dozens of voices at once, building to a terrible crescendo. She fled in terror and never returned. The town began to believe that the children had not left. Their souls lingered, restless, bound to the note they had died singing. Superstition grew stronger with each sighting. People stopped walking near the cathedral after sundown. Doors were locked earlier. Children were forbidden to sing certain hymns. Even festivals grew quieter, stripped of music and laughter. The bishop tried to calm the panic. He preached that grief had made the town imagine ghosts where there were none. But few believed him. His words had no power against what people heard with their own ears. A shoemaker told of closing his shop late one night when he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting a customer. Instead, he saw a boy in a white choir robe, his face pale as wax, his mouth wide open as if singing, but no sound came. Then, with a blink, the figure was gone. The shoemaker left Caltanissetta within the week. The haunting left its mark not only on the living, but on the town itself. Houses near the cathedral lost value. Merchants struggled as fewer pilgrims dared travel there. The bells of the cathedral, once the pride of the town, were rung less and less, until their silence became another ghostly reminder. Even the air felt different, heavier, colder. On certain nights, the mist would roll in thick and damp, clinging to skin, carrying with it the faintest trace of children's voices. The townspeople called it La Nebbia dei Morti, the fog of the dead. And in that fog, one truth became clear to all. The boys of Caltanissetta had not been laid to rest. Their songs still drifted through the streets. Their silence still accused the living. And every time the voices rose, The town remembered what it wanted most to forget, that someone among them had caused the children's deaths. Amid the grief and superstition, one man tried to find reason. Dr. Salvatore Marchetti, the town physician, had examined the boys' bodies in secret. He was not permitted an official autopsy, the church forbade it, but as the doctor, families pleaded with him to look closer. He agreed, though reluctantly, and what he discovered haunted him more than the whispers of ghosts ever could. The boys' lungs were darkened, not with sickness, but with something foreign. Their throats carried traces of a bitter substance, sharp to the tongue. Marchetti noted discoloration along their lips, a faint blackening that did not match any illness he knew. It was not plague. It was not fever. It was not natural. It was poison. The doctor wanted to speak, to stand in the square and tell the grieving families the truth. But he knew the danger. To accuse the cathedral, the bishop, or the orphanage was to bring ruin upon himself. The church was not to be challenged. Still, he could not stay silent. He kept a small notebook, hidden beneath the floorboards of his study, where he recorded every finding. He listed symptoms, the condition of each body, and even sketched the organ pipes as he suspected them to be the true source of the poison. He wrote one chilling line beneath his sketches. "The pipes do not give music, they give death." Then, one night, the doctor vanished. His house was found in disarray, a candle burned to the wick, his study ransacked. The floorboards where he kept his notebook had been pried open, the hiding place empty. His neighbors swore they heard shouting before dawn, then silence. By morning, Dr. Marchetti was gone. No body was ever found. The church claimed he had fled town in shame, overcome by grief. But the townspeople did not believe it. They knew Marchetti. He was a proud man, stubborn, unwilling to abandon his people. His disappearance felt less like flight and more like erasure. After his vanishing, rumors spread faster than before. People whispered that the bishop had silenced the doctor. Some claimed Marchetti's body lay buried beneath the cathedral garden, under the same roses that hid the chalice. Others swore he was locked in a convent cell, his voice muzzled so the truth could not escape his lips. But one thing was certain. The doctor had known too much. His absence became its own kind of evidence. His missing notebook a shadow more damning than any ghost. And though his voice was gone, his words lingered in the minds of those who had listened. The boys had been poisoned. The bishop was hiding something. And anyone who came too close to the truth disappeared. By 1869, nearly a year had passed, and the town's grief had hardened into rage. Families demanded justice. Fathers pressed for an inquiry. Mothers begged for answers. The name of Dr. Marchetti was whispered in alleyways, his findings recounted like sacred scripture. People wanted the bishop tried. At first, the pressure grew too loud to ignore. A tribunal was proposed. The bishop himself was summoned to Palermo, where church officials would hear the case. It should have been the beginning of justice. But justice never came. The trial never happened. Records show the bishop did travel to Palermo. He was gone for weeks, leaving the cathedral in silence. When he returned, he carried papers with red seals, declarations stamped by men far above the townspeople's reach. The documents absolved him, declaring the tragedy an act of God, beyond human control. No poison, no chalice, no blame. The people were furious. They cried out in the square, demanding the tribunal be held in Caltanissetta, where the voices of grieving parents could be heard. But soldiers marched into town to keep order. Their rifles glinted in the Sicilian sun, and their presence silenced protests before they began. The bishop preached from the pulpit the following Sunday, his words cold and final. The matter is closed. But the matter was not closed. Behind locked doors, families whispered of betrayal. They spoke of the missing chalice, of Marchetti's disappearance, of the children who sang their last breath in harmony. They told one another that the church had buried the truth, just as it had buried the boys. The angriest among them proposed taking justice into their own hands. A few even planned to storm the cathedral, to dig up the altar stones themselves and uncover what was hidden. but fear prevailed. The soldiers remained in town for months, their presence a constant reminder of who held power. One night, an attempt was made anyway. A group of fathers broke into the cathedral, armed with picks and shovels. They were caught before they reached the choir loft. By morning, 2 were imprisoned, and the rest publicly shamed. Their punishment was a warning. This mystery would never be solved by the people of Caltanissetta. The trial that never happened became its own curse. With no justice, grief festered into resentment. With no answers, fear hardened into legend. The town was left with silence, with shadows, and with the bitter knowledge that truth had been stolen from them, locked away by men who claimed to serve God. And though the church had declared the case closed, the people knew the truth was still alive, buried like a wound beneath the skin of Caltanissetta. Waiting, the graveyard of Caltanissetta became a place of pilgrimage, not prayer. The boys were buried together in one long trench, their coffins side by side, marked by a single stone carved with the words, Cantavirent Deo et Siliurunt. They sang to God, and then were silent. But the grave was never silent. Visitors swore that if you stood there after sunset, the air itself vibrated. Not like wine through the trees, not like the shifting of earth, but like sound without source, low, trembling, unearthly. Some described it as a hum. Others said it was the faint chorus of children. Always the same note, always unbroken. It was as if the earth itself had learned their final song and refused to let it die. Families came often, leaving flowers, rosaries, locks of hair tied with ribbon. Some prayed aloud, begging their children's souls to rest. But the longer they stayed, the more unsettled they felt. One mother fainted after swearing she heard her son's voice, calling her by name from beneath the soil. A father clawed at the dirt in desperation, certain he heard knocking from the coffins below. Gravediggers avoided the trench at all costs. They refused to work near it after dark, muttering that the ground moved when the moon was full. They claimed the boys sang not in sorrow but in warning, that their voices rose whenever someone in the town drew too close to the truth. As months turned into years, the graveyard became a place of fear rather than mourning. Children dared one another to sneak between the headstones at night, only to return pale and shaken, insisting they heard footsteps behind them. The legend deepened when travelers from nearby towns came to visit. They had heard the stories, dismissed them as superstition, until they too felt the vibration beneath their feet. Some left gifts at the grave, believing the boys to be saints, martyrs who had died in purity. Others fled, swearing never to return. But the strangest stories came from the priests themselves. Though they denied it in public, a few confided in whispers that during late-night vigils, they heard the same note rise from the grave. One described it as a sound too steady for human breath, too endless for human lungs. The song from the grave became Caltanissetta's curse. It was not loud, not constant, but it lingered, reminding the living that silence would never come. The boys had been buried, but their voices had not. And so, every visit to the graveyard carried with it the same unshakable question. Were the children singing for salvation, or were they demanding justice from the earth itself? For years, the cathedral bells had been silent. Out of respect, out of fear, their silence had become part of the town's mourning, a reminder of the night when sound itself betrayed them. But one stormy evening, decades after the tragedy, the bells rang again. The sky was black with rain, lightning flashing over the rooftops. The townspeople rushed to shutter their windows, when suddenly, the air split with the deep, resonant clang of the cathedral's great bronze bell. One strike, then another, then another. Families froze. No one had been assigned to ring them. The ropes were untouched. Yet the bells swung wildly, their voices carrying across the valley, echoing through stone streets, shattering the uneasy silence that had gripped Caltanissetta for so long. People spilled into the square, soaked by rain, staring up at the cathedral tower. Some wept openly. Others fell to their knees, but not one dared step inside. Witnesses swore they saw figures in the bell tower, small silhouettes, pale against the lightning, swaying with the ropes. Children, dozens of them. Their outlines moved in unison, just as the choirboys once had. And as the bells tolled, another sound rose beneath them. Faint, fragile, yet unmistakable. Singing. The hymn was the same as the night of the tragedy. A song of sorrow and salvation. But this time, the voices carried no harmony. It was one note held high, trembling, eternal. The storm raged, thunder clashing like drums of war. But the children's voices pierced through everything. The sound rolled over rooftops, into the hills, and down to the fields beyond. People covered their ears, but still it rang inside them, vibrating in their bones. The bishop was gone by then, buried years earlier. His successors avoided speaking of the tragedy, but none dared touch the bells again. That night proved the children's song could not be silenced. Not by time, not by death, not by the church. When morning came, the bells were still. The ropes lay untouched, damp with rain. The tower was empty, but the memory of that night burned into the soul of Caltanissetta. The bells had spoken. The children had returned. And the town knew, with a certainty that no decree from Palermo could erase. The boys were not at rest. Their song was not over. And until the truth was unearthed, the bells of Caltanissetta would never truly be silent.